Hello friends, welcome back to Aunt Debbie's Boutique. This is day 10, block 10 of our sampler quilt that's beginner friendly. Just a few things I would like to mention before we get started is I'm using the Buzzworthy by Canvas Studios for all of my blocks. I'm using a layer cake, and I'm using Kona white cotton, also a layer cake. So some of these patterns, and they're not necessarily, some of them are my original patterns, some of them are just timeless patterns that aren't copyrighted that anybody can use. And I'm adapting everything to a 10-inch layer cake. And the way I chose these patterns was on simplicity. There's really no rhyme or reason to how they go together. It's going to be a very good assortment of different quilt blocks. But I wanted beginners to know that they didn't just have to sew a bunch of big squares together and make a checkerboard. There's very simple patterns that you can also do. Okay. To get the best out of your quilt block, for it to look the best when you're through, you need accurate cutting and accurate stitching. You need to make sure your seam allowance is a 1/4 inch or even a scant less. I use a scant 1/4 inch so my block doesn't get too small. Another thing is good ironing. And I know that not everybody agrees with me on this. I see a lot of people put quilt blocks together and never iron it till the end. And that's just not my philosophy. So you can choose to do whatever you want. I also recommend that you starch and iron all your pieces before you start. And I use a leader. Let me see if I've got one laying here somewhere. Just a little scrap of fabric. Here's one, it's got lots of threads off of it. But just a little scrap of fabric that I use to start when I'm chaining blocks together. That just gives me a jump start so that I don't have any loose stitches at the beginning. There's not a bird's nest on the back of it. We don't have to back stitch because we use a 2.5 millimeter stitch length. And that's very hard to rip out, so it won't come out accidentally. We are going to have 12.5 inch blocks when we're done, and then when we sew them together, they'll be 12-inch blocks. And plus, we're going to have some sashing and a border. We usually iron our seams to one side or the other because it gives the quilt more strength than if you iron the seam open. But sometimes the easiest thing to do is just iron the seam open, and that's okay. It's just easier for it to pull apart if it's ironed open. Okay, let's get started on today's block. Today's block is going to be a fun and easy one. All we're going to need is 12 2.5 inch strips that are 10 inches long. And not only are we going to make today's block, but we're going to have a piece left over for another block that we're going to make. So I kind of divided these into what I kind of consider darks and lights, or dark and contrast, whatever. And these are really busy prints. I'm noticing that as I'm putting this together. But I like them anyway. Okay, I'm going to take 3 of the dark and lay it on this side, 3 of the dark and lay it on this side. Then I'm going to take 3 of the light over here and 3 of the light here, just so I have an assortment of how everything goes together. Then I'm just going to grab contrasting blocks, however I think they should go together. And we're going to do this just like we put binding together And it's also very similar to our half square triangles. Well, no, because we're not going to put 2 seams. But what I'm going to do is go from this corner to this corner here, which is the edge of the other strip. And I'm going to draw a line. And I'm going to pin it so I don't get it turned around any funky way. Then I'm going to take the next one. You notice I'm doing these all the same direction. That's because I've already divided them up to be, you know, half dark and half light. I'm going to mark this one. And make sure I know where the end of that block is. There it is. Okay, I'm going to lay these aside and just bear with me while I mark the rest of these. Okay, I'm going to take these over the sewing machine and I'm going to sew right on that line I drew and chain all these together. Let's cut our strips apart. And let's make sure, yes, that they're opening right. All right, they all are, so let's trim them all. About a 1/4 inch. Okay, then we're going to lay them all out and iron them. All right, I'm going to iron them all towards this side. Okay, this is basically a geometric block, and it's more of a modern block than some of the traditional ones we've done, and you can have a lot of fun with it by turning them different directions and trimming them different ways. You could even sew half of them this direction, half of them this way, and kind of have a sawtooth effect. I'm I want to kind of rearrange a few of these so we have an assortment. Okay, now then I'm going to take them over to the machine and I'm going to line them up as perfectly as I can. And I'm going to sew a 1/4 inch seam on all of these. Okay, now that we have our block basically together, we want to iron all our seams. And it looks like I cut one of these wrong, so I'm just going to clip it here so it irons right. Is that the only one? No. Okay. Okay, now we need to trim it down to 12.5 inch square. And we need to decide whether we want the majority of this or the majority of this. I think I want the majority of this side. So what I'm going to do is line my center line up on a line on my cutting board so I know that it's even. And I'm just barely going to trim it, whatever it takes to get it all one length. Okay, then I'm going to flip it around. And I'm going to measure over 12.5 inches. And my new cutting board is not quite as easy to figure out. The lines aren't as predominant as my old one was. Should have used a longer ruler. Okay, and here is our quilt block. Let's see. Yep, they're all going the same direction, which is what I intended. Now this fabric is so busy that it just makes it busier. I really think this block looks better with small prints and that are different colored. These are so much similar. And I have no idea if I sewed them together in the way I had them laid out. I got a little confused over there. Okay, this is our quilt block for today. But we want to take this, let's see how much we have left. We have 4.5 to 5 inches over here left. But just put this aside and we're going to use this in another quilt block. Okay, on my sample one that I did. I did it slightly different. Let me show you. In that I did points. And that's a little bit harder because you have to sew half of them one direction, half of the other. You can't just turn them around because these points won't line up. They'll be in different places. So you can do that if you want to sew half of them one direction and half of them the other. But I thought this one was a simpler one. And when you get various quilt blocks, you can turn them different directions, or you can do it the same and it comes out like that. You know what? We didn't trim our block in the other direction, did we? No, it's a little bit large, so I'll trim that down. It's a little bit long in one direction, but I have to trim off about 1/4 inch. Okay, thank you for joining me today. That was a quick one, but you deserve an easy one. I hope you've enjoyed this, and if you have, would you please like and subscribe? And please ignore my dogs. They get restless when I'm not giving them my full attention. All right, remember, whatever you do, do it to the glory of the Lord. And we'll see you tomorrow for block number 11.